You are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. Marcus Benjamin here, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also, subscribe to this podcast on all platforms. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about the new hire for the Miami Hurricanes. Reportedly, Miami is going with a new head coach for their basketball program, Lucas. And coming on with me to talk about the essential hire is Conor O'Neil, the publisher for Devils Illustrated, also part of the Rivals.com network. Thanks for joining me today, Conor.
Thanks for having me on, Marcus.
Yeah, so like I said, man, Miami looks as if they are hiring Lucas, the Duke assistant coach, as their new head coach. Now, when the news came out, I mean, fans weren't very happy, I would say, just because he has limited head coaching experience. So it's not really a splash name down here. We like splash names, and Lucas doesn't exactly move the needle for the fan base, man. So first off, do you think this hire is a good hire, if it's a legit hire? We kind of talked a little bit off camera here, saying that this possibly could be not official. Well, what's your insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing, like, I don't want to come out and say that I have conflicting information on this not happening, because I don't. I'm so hesitant to fully launch into Jay Lucas is going to be Miami's next coach without anything from my end, from program sources at Duke, and or an official announcement from Miami. And I don't think we're going to get that until either after Duke season ends or, maybe sometime in the NCAA tournament. Coaching staffs are a lot more available. This from covering Miami a couple years ago. Like, there's so much more available in the NCAA tournament because there's open locker rooms and you can go talk to assistants and guys on the end of the bench that you don't normally get to talk to after games and stuff like that. So maybe something comes out in the next month before it's officially announced. But it's small, but I'll correct you now so that you kind of have it in your brain. It's Jay.
Jay.
When he was hired from Kentucky at Duke, I spent like a couple weeks calling him Jai because you just you see the AI and want to pronounce it differently, but it is Jay.
Okay, thanks for that.
I don't know if it's my place to like correct Miami fans on how they should feel about this, but I think it's a great hire. I think that, look, this guy, you can get sidetracked by his age and the fact that he hasn't been a head coach yet, but he's been on a path to being a head coach for a long, long time. Like, you're talking about a guy that worked his way up at Texas, was good enough at Texas to be hired by John Calipari, and then was good enough at Kentucky to be hired by John Shire as he was building his first staff at Duke. And it was a big deal when Duke hired Jay because Jay was the first assistant coach hired at Duke in about 25 to 30 years who hadn't played at Duke. Like, Coach K was in such a mode of hiring former Duke captains. It wasn't even just former Duke players. It was, if you were a captain at Duke and you wanted to go into coaching, you were probably going to get hired by Coach K at some point. So John branched off of that and hired Jay, and he's been phenomenal. He's been Duke's defensive coordinator for the last 3 years. I wrote a story a couple years ago about how college basketball staffs were kind of morphing toward more of a coordinator type structure as opposed to, each of your three assistant coaches has a game plan and a scout going into each game. Duke 2 years ago won the ACC tournament. They won 10 games in a row to get to the second round of the NCAA tournament. Defense was their calling card. That's what they did best. Last year, They were the same KenPom rank from John's first year to second year. So the first year that Jay was on staff, the second year. They were more flawed last year defensively. I thought that had more to do with personnel than anything. I mean, sometimes they had to be out there with 4 guards, and they just didn't have the size. They were playing Kyle Filipowski out of position at the 5 position. This year, I think they're 4th in KenPom in defensive efficiency right now. They've been 1st at times this season. They're a phenomenal defensive team. They're one of the elites on that end of the court, and a lot of that has to do with Jay and the coverages that he switches up during games, the adjustments, the way that they coach defense, the way that they're connected. I don't know how he builds out a program. Like you don't know that until the guy is actually going to be a head coach. Right. But from a X's and O's standpoint, I haven't even mentioned recruiting and the guys that he's gotten as lead recruiter. I mean, sometimes I feel like you or I could go be an assistant coach at Duke and probably get a decent haul just because it's recruiting to Duke basketball.
Right.
But you've got to be a pretty skilled recruiter to get those guys in there. I mean, like short of getting, a Scott Drew or one of the guys that turned down Kentucky last year or anything like that, I think this is about as good of a hire as Miami could get.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear. I'm pretty sure to the audience here who, want to see this program turn back around. I mean, it was just 2 years ago that this team was in the Final Four, and now they've only won 2 of their last 16 games here, and, are struggling, with injuries now, with Matthew Cleveland out, Nigel Pack has been out for a while, and those were your only 2 returning starters from last season. So you got a bunch of transfers and a bunch of young guys, a bunch of nice, talented guys from recruiting. You did mention recruiting. I did want to kind of, find out about his recruiting prowess. I wasn't aware that he was the lead recruit out at Duke. So tell me a little bit more, I guess, a bit about some of the players that he has brought in to Duke, and just how much of a recruiter do you think he could be at Miami?
Yeah, so basically, like, this is gonna, I don't know the best way to say this, but basically when John Shire knew he was gonna be promoted from assistant or associate to head coach to replace Mike Krzyzewski, he was losing a staff member. Like, Duke lost Mike Krzyzewski, but John Shire kind of lost himself as the young, energetic recruiter on Duke's staff, because you can't be both of those. Like, you can't be a head coach and also be that. John Shire's a closer in recruiting, but he had to kind of replace himself when he was moving up to the big seat. Jay was his pick to do that. Like, that was who he wanted. Jay, I lose track of who's the lead recruiter and who runs point on these things, but Jay was right there and in constant contact with the boozers. So that's the one where, within an hour of, I think, the first tweet about it happening on Saturday, I had people on the message board asking me, how does this affect the boozers, if at all? I don't think Jay swings them to stay home in Miami. I'll be upfront about that right now. Would I have a heart attack if he does? Probably not, but like, I don't think that'll be the case. I think the one to watch is Shelton Henderson. He's a built through the upper body 6'5", 6'6" wing out of Texas. He actually went to the same high school that Jay did. God, I can't remember the name, and I could have told you 5 minutes ago if it didn't come up organically. But that's the one that I would be curious if Jay is able to convince him to instead of going east and north, just go east and go south a little bit from Texas to Miami. Nice. Jay's recruiting pedigree it's kind of a toss up in my mind of what his better strength is between coaching defense and recruiting. Now, obviously, like I just said, John hired him to be his energetic young recruiter on the staff. Jay is not going to be able to do as much of that as the head coach, but I would trust that he has an eye for it and is able to identify somebody that can fill that role and also be kind of the same thing that John Shire has been at Duke, the closer who comes in and makes sure to get those guys in and get them on campus and that kind of thing.
Awesome. Good stuff there. Shelton Henderson, as you mentioned, from Bel Air. And 6'5", 210. He's a 5-star, recruit on Rivals. Fourth ranked small forward in the country. So that would be a huge get for Miami if he can, swing down to Coral Gables for his college career. I did want to ask, you did mention a little bit about, kind of his specialty, which is defense. So, can you talk a little bit about, I guess his philosophy on defense and how that can help the Hurricanes?
He wants to switch everything. And part of that is personnel based. And I would assume Miami is going to bend over backward to try to get him the personnel that allows him to do it. But also, I mean, bluntly, it's really easy to switch 1 through 5 when 1 year Derek Lively is your center and he can go out and guard on the perimeter, not only against like Pitt and Miami 2 years ago, but also do it last year as a rookie in the NBA and be really good at it. And then this year, I heap praise on Jay for his defensive acumen. And I don't mean to say this part of it as a knock against him, but again, like I might be able to coach a decent defense if I had Cooper Flagg on my team and Common Malawach and all the guys that they have on this year's team. I mean, they're so defensive oriented that a lot of it, maybe not a lot of it, but some of it isn't scheme. Some of it's just you have a bunch of guys that take pride on that end of the court. And that's where I think Jay gets credit is he's gotten them to buy into how valuable it is on that end of the court. How as good as this Duke team is offensively, like they just scored 110 points against Illinois in the Garden, they're still a defensive first team. Like they're still all of their offensive success is going to be predicated on how well they're playing defense. And so holding Illinois to 67, I think Illinois went into the game averaging like 85. They held everybody under their season average. So the thing that you see most with Duke's defense is switching 1 through 5 and being able to, you're not worried about, are you playing a drop coverage in pick and roll? Are you playing hedge? Are you doing that? You're just switching. And it's the easiest thing to do, in my mind at least, to have your big men be able to stay in front of a guard. But again, not everybody can play that. And you have to have the personnel to play it or it's going to go horribly and you're going to give up a ton of points. But I don't know how much worse that can get. Like I say it, like with all due respect, I think Miami, at least when I looked last night, they were like 336th in KenPom in defensive efficiency. So I don't know how much worse it can get on that end of the court.
Yeah, tell me about it. I don't know how much worse it could really get with Miami basketball this season. So it's been one of the worst seasons in recent memory for the Hurricanes, who have thrived under Jim Larinaga, who, of course, retired mid-season, and Bill Courtney, the assistant, has taken over. But the team hasn't really improved much since then. Only 2 conference wins. One of those conference losses was a blowout loss to Duke, where Miami only scored, I believe, 54 points in that game. They were pretty much kind of completely dominated. Duke was hot from 3 in that game, and it wasn't really ever really that close. Which I also do want to add, before I get into like the game with you, I do want to ask, do you think Jay Lucas will be on the sideline for this game? Because Miami plays Duke this Tuesday at the Watsco Center. So with all that's going on here, it would be interesting to see if he's even on the sideline or at this game? What do you expect?
I expect him to be. I expect him to be with Duke until Duke's season ends. And I mean, he. I don't want to go down the list of like the players that are more valuable to Duke's chances of winning a national championship than Jay Lucas, but Jay Lucas is an integral part of Duke trying to win a national championship. And I just can't see a coach jumping ship this late in the season, or really if this had happened 2 months ago, even I'd be saying the same thing. I can't see a coach leaving a team that has a chance to win a national championship. If Duke was like in the position of, say, an NC State or even a Virginia or Syracuse, and the season was going nowhere in a hurry, then maybe, yeah, you want to get out of there and start building your staff out, start figuring out who you're going to go after in the portal and all that stuff. But with this team and where Duke is, I expect Jay to just kind of continue in the role that he's been in for the last 2+ seasons. And then once Duke's season ends, then we'll have official word, and he'll be Miami's coach, as long as everything like goes to how we think it's going to go.
Gotcha. Will be interesting to see how he kind of navigates the season, if he indeed is going to be the next coach for Miami. But yeah, Miami will be hosting Duke. I didn't even see what the line was for this game, but I would imagine it's pretty high here. Let me see if I can find it really quick here.
And KenPom has it as a 23-point spread, and I think the lines usually closely mirror that, so it'll probably be in the like 22 to 25 point range.
Yep, that sounds about right. That's kind of what I expect here, with that game. Does Miami, in your opinion, does Miami have any chance to pull off an upset here against the number 3 team in the nation?
You know me, Marcus, I hate being a homer, but I just don't know if they do.
Yeah.
I think the only chance Miami has, that I'll give you 2 keys that I think would make it a game. One being Duke has a hangover from the Illinois game. I have not gotten the sense that this Duke team is that immature. Like I would have said that about the last 2 years with where Duke was, but this team is tougher, more veteran focused. That's what the impact of the 3 transfers they brought in has really kept them zeroed in on the task at hand and quickly turning the page. Everybody uses turning the page to talk about how you have to move on from losses, but this team moves on from wins really quickly. Like they don't get caught up in their own headlines and their own hype. And that's why they're 24-3. You can just put it right there. The other thing that I think could make this a game is if Miami gets hot from 3-point range. And I guess you can say that about any game that Duke goes into or anybody else goes into. Like Illinois was 2 for 26 on threes. I mean, that was an evisceration that had a lot to do with the way Duke played, but it also had a lot to do with how bad Illinois played. So if Miami's able to come out, like we saw about a month ago now, NC State is right there in the bottom 3 of the ACC with Miami. They were up double digits on Duke in Cameron because they were hot from 3. I think they hit something like 10 of their first 18 or it was above 50% or around 50%. So if Miami can get hot, they have some guys that can do that. Like that just was looking last night at AJ Staten McRae's line, and he's come on strong. If he gets hot, if Jaleel Bethea gets hot, if Austin Schwartz gets hot, I mean, yeah, you're going to miss Matthew Cleveland if he doesn't play, but you still have the guys that can make plays and make shots to make this a competitive game, or at least a more competitive game than the point spread is going to lead you to believe it'll be.
Yeah. Speaking of that point spread, before I let you go, man, do you think Duke makes the spread? I mean, I'm not They did make it at the last game. I believe the spread was around the same 23, 22, something like that. And Duke ended up pulling away late to kind of make that, So, if you had to put your finger on it as far as what this final score would be on Tuesday night, what say you?
I would probably lean toward Duke covering. Look, it's hard to separate what we just watched on Saturday night. I mean, that was a neutral court game against a team that is either going to be like a 7, 8, or 9 seed in the NCAA tournament. I mean, Illinois would have to have the wheels completely fall off for them to miss the tournament. And based on the highlights we're watching right now and how wide open Duke was getting threes in the first matchup against Miami, it's going to be really hard to slow down Duke.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think Duke has ability to beat you in a couple of different ways. They can outscore you, or they can just out defend you. So if you look up and down at their scores, they held opponents, their last few opponents, to 67, 62, 70, 57, and then they score 110 in regulation, which is like crazy nowadays in college basketball, that teams are just scoring 100 points in 40 minutes of play. And so they scored 110, 80, 106. So, yeah, I see this game being in somewhere in that range. Miami kind of just struggles to score, and they struggle to defend as well. They've improved a little bit since Courtney has kind of taken over, but definitely not enough to stop a juggernaut that is the Duke Blue Devils. So I think it's going to be a very similar game that we saw last time. I see them scoring about 80 points, and I see Miami scoring about 50 to 60 points. So I think it'll be right around that number, So I'd kind of probably stay away from the number and just, maybe bet the money line on Duke here, just to win the game, because I'm not so sure about if they would cover the actual point spread here. But yeah, should be interesting to see how Duke kind of finishes off the season. Miami as well. Want to see Matthew Cleveland return. He's definitely been the spark for the Hurricanes on the court as of late. It'd be interesting to see how Miami finishes off the season, and also how they complete their season in the ACC tournament. It's hard for me to ask you to not be a homer, but do you think Duke will win the ACC tournament?
I'll put it this way. I want to see a rematch between them and Clemson on a neutral court. That was the best game in the ACC so far this year. It was a high-level game. I think that's the path we're headed, or it could be Duke Louisville. I mean, right now it looks like there's a pretty clear top 3 in the ACC. So Duke would, in the semifinals, be playing Wake or SMU, I think, as it's laid out right now. Wake gave them a really tough game and has them again in Durham a week from tonight. But the potential championship matchup, if you look that far in ahead, Duke played at Louisville in early December when Louisville was still kind of trying to figure out who they were going to be without Kayshawn Pryor. And so they've been so much better in the 3 months since Duke played them that would be an intriguing matchup. And then the Duke-Clemson matchup would also be interesting just because of what I said. Like that was such a high-level game down to Clemson that I'd like to see 40 minutes more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's Conor O'Neil, ladies and gentlemen, who is the publisher for Devils Illustrated, part of the Rivals.com network. He covers the Duke Blue Devils football, baseball, and basketball team, as I do myself with the Miami Hurricanes. Thank you for joining me once again, Conor.
Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate it.
No problem. That's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the website, kingscounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. And also subscribe to the YouTube channel live from Gaines County. Until the next episode.